By the end of 1993, the developers of id Software had become the new face of American entrepreneurship. After creating a great game called Commander Keen in their spare time, they published it through another small company, Apogee. Making use of the emerging internet phenomenon to skip retail stores completely, Apogee turned a number of id's games into solid hits. But Wolfenstein 3D in 1992 overwhelmed Apogee by becoming a runaway success, a fast-paced action title that invented the modern first-person shooter genre. With that kind of profit under their belt, and having learned everything they needed to from Apogee, id decided to go it alone for their next game. They would self-publish the project, a shooter that would be similar to Wolfenstein, but better in every way. Convinced that it would conquer the world, they chose to call it what it represented to other developers: Doom. Even with their own insanely high expectations, Doom's success blew them away. It became one of the most popular and influential titles in the medium's history, a reputation it retains to this day. The 20-somethings of the company were now millionaires and the kings of their industry. But as they moved on to their next masterpieces, the fault lines within the company would shake them to their core, and once again, split the founders apart. After the release and subsequent domination of Doom, different members of the id crew focused on different projects. For engine coder John Carmack, the next step was to craft an even greater machine. For as good as it looked, the Doom engine was technically not 3D, but rather a very good approximation of it. The players still couldn't look up or down, and the enemies were still represented by 2D sprites. True 3D was clearly going to be the future of the medium. Carmack's engines had redefined what was possible on a PC, and he wasn't about to stop now. But creating a new engine would take quite a while, and in the meantime, id's designers still had his excellent Doom tech to work with. The success of Doom had obviously attracted the attention of major traditional publishers. Id inked a deal with GT Interactive to create a boxed Doom game for store shelves. The result was Doom 2: Hell on Earth in October 1994. Using the original game's tech, John Romero and the design team crafted new missions and maps for the player to blast his way through in single and multiplayer. The game was another huge seller and gave the company a strong retail presence. Combined with boxed releases of the original Doom for PCs as well as consoles, and id was beginning to see the advantages of the traditional route. With the windfall profits that Doom had earned, id began staffing up into a bigger company. With more employees working on their new games, Romero felt like he could start working less. It was a fair point. In crunch mode for Doom, he'd basically been working around the clock. Now he could work a normal 8-hour day. Problem was, he spent most of those 8 hours playing Doom online. Outside of work, he was living it up with big parties and fan events. Nominally, these were improving id's relationship with its audience, but the rest of the guys were getting nervous that he just didn't care about actually working on the games anymore. Romero was starting to look like a loose cannon. After completing Doom 2, they needed to figure out what they wanted to do on their next game. The Wolfenstein Doom combo had been a success for its innovations in both technology and design, and Romero felt like their next game should mirror that philosophy. So as Carmack and his team perfected the new engine, Romero once again concocted a brand new gameplay formula. Where Doom had been all about guns and distance, the new game would be a first-person melee game that got players up close and personal with the enemy. The idea all stemmed from a major character in the Dungeons & Dragons campaign that the guys had played for years. In that campaign, a powerful warrior named Quake helped the guys defeat monsters with his powerful hammer. And so, both Carmack and Romero wanted to make Quake the star of his own game. The problem was, until Carmack and his team got finished with the code, it was all just on paper. It was impossible to actually test Romero's new melee combat design to see if it played as well as he thought. And Carmack found that the jump from pseudo 3D to actual 3D was bigger than he had first thought. Promised release dates for Quake slipped by, and in the meantime, the design team was twiddling their thumbs waiting for the engine to finish. Adrian Carmack and his art team were turning out great concept art for the medieval fantasy game, but like the designers, couldn't implement any of it until Carmack was done. Eventually, a meeting was called to discuss the future of the project. Carmack was still working on his engine. If they waited for that to finish, and only then got started on the hard work of building, testing, and refining a brand new game style, the project could be delayed for years. Some of the guys believed that it would be a better idea to just make another Doom-like shooter, or even Doom 3. Romero hated this idea. He didn't want id to be a company that just made the same game over and over again. He wanted to innovate with each new franchise. To his horror, he found that everyone else, including Carmack, disagreed. They wanted the game to be done in a timely fashion, which meant jettisoning either Carmack's tech or Romero's design. Romero lost. They'd be making a first-person shooter. With a familiar direction to follow, the team found it was easy to craft the game once Carmack and his team finally finished the code. The results of their efforts were once again extraordinary. The engine could render true 3D environments smoothly and beautifully, allowing the player to look in any direction he wanted. Aside from the graphics, the engine was also a leap forward in networking. Doom had allowed 2 players to go head-to-head over the internet. Quake would allow up to 16 players to play simultaneously. If any game could make Doom's multiplayer look quaint, Quake could. With the engine done and the designers and artists finally able to work, one thing that remained was the sound design. id had never handled sound internally, always contracting out somebody else. This time, the rockstars at id employed a real rockstar to create a sonic masterpiece. Trent Reznor from 9 Inch Nails had been a huge fan of Doom and was only too happy to write all the music and design all the audio for Quake. It would sound as amazing as it looked. As if all that wasn't enough, when it finally came time to release the game on June 22, 1996, id decided to merge the lessons they'd learned from online distribution with the power of retail. When Quake hit store shelves as a boxed product, gamers found that it only cost $10. However, only a portion of the game was playable. To unlock the rest, they'd have to pay id another $50 to get an unlock key. It was an innovative idea, but there was one factor that id hadn't counted on: the widespread piracy afforded by the internet. Once one hacker figured out how to unlock the full game for free, he posted the hack online, and before long, everyone was doing it. The same technology that had spread id's games to the far corners of the earth was now eating into their profit margin. Even for all that, Quake was another huge success. As anticipated, the 16-person multiplayer made for an infectious addiction that spread from one friend to the next. Entire offices would stay late after work to deathmatch against each other. The phenomenon became so big that a couple of local fans in Dallas decided to host an open deathmatching event. Anybody could come, all you had to do was bring your own computer. The result was QuakeCon, and to the fans' delight, the id team themselves showed up to hang out. The event has since become an annual affair, a showcase for sweet hardware rigs, and an announcement venue for id's newest projects. Aside from the sales of the game itself, Carmack's engine was again the talk of the town, and the licensing fees were a huge source of revenue. Notably, the Quake engine would power the first game of Valve software, Half-Life, and would be the base of their future Source engine. Of the many things accomplished with the Quake technology, one of the more surprising was the first piece of film created in real time with a 3D renderer. Diary of a Camper was a quick little joke put together by a group of Quake players called the Rangers. In it, the Rangers must defeat an opponent who isn't playing fair, and when they finally kill him, find that it was John Romero himself. This use of a game engine to create film was later termed Machinima. The medium is still going strong to this day. Everything was going great. The game was selling well, and people around the world were playing online. But back at id, a storm was brewing. Carmack had had enough of Romero. Carmack felt like his co-founder just wasn't invested in the actual work anymore, just the fame and glory. At the same time, Romero was feeling like id was becoming stagnant, just making one shooter after another instead of innovating new ideas. Finally, the inevitable arrived. Carmack, with the rest of the company behind him, asked Romero to resign. As with Tom Hall before him, Romero found that the company he had helped create had turned into something else. He felt that id was now just a tech company that didn't care about the design anymore. Thus, he agreed to resign. He had plans anyway. He and Hall had reconnected recently, and they wanted to start their own company, where design would be king and the tech would serve them. It was called Ion Storm. With only 2 of id's 4 founders remaining, the developer got to work on Quake 2. After the failure of their $10 model, id realized that the industry had changed, and they needed a top-level publisher to help them sell their product. So they signed a long-lasting deal with Activision, which put out the Quake sequel on December 9th, 1997. The game was a hit, but at the same time proved Romero's suspicions. While boasting yet another engine masterpiece from Carmack, the actual gameplay was little changed from its predecessor. Some reviews faulted the company for just spinning its wheels, albeit with shinier wheels than before. Meanwhile, other shooters like Jedi Knight and GoldenEye were pushing the envelope with exciting stories and more features. As id got to work on Quake 3, the internal problems were only getting worse. Romero, for all his wild antics, had also been incredibly personable and a good team leader. Carmack, by contrast, was a reclusive genius who didn't know how to keep a crew motivated. Worse, Carmack started making decisions that he refused to back down from. As they began work on the new Quake, Carmack announced that the game would be multiplayer only. No story, no campaign, no monsters. Just pure, unadulterated deathmatch. The crew was furious. They'd been making futuristic shooters for years, and they wanted to finally try something new. They wanted to create an exciting new world to explore with cool monsters to fight. Carmack ignored them. Quake 3 Arena released on December 5th, 1999. As Carmack wanted, it was an online-only futuristic shooter with, you guessed it, his team's latest masterpiece of an engine. Of all their many engines, this one would be his most successful in terms of licensing. A huge number of games from across the industry would make use of it. Notably, the young upstart Infinity Ward would use it to power the first Call of Duty game, and the engine powering the current series derives from it. But that being said, both the engine and the game itself found themselves in unexpectedly stiff competition with another shooter called Unreal Tournament. Unreal Tournament had released just a week earlier, and while it also was a multiplayer-only shooter, it featured a smorgasbord of different gameplay modes. Quake 3 was all deathmatch, all the time. Nothing else. On the tech side, Unreal's creator, Epic Games, released a suite of editing tools with their game that made it easy for anybody to create content, even non-coders. In the coming years, Unreal's engines would overshadow id's. It was the last month of the last year of the 1990s. Throughout that decade, from Commander Keen to Wolfenstein 3D to Doom to Quake, the guys at id Software had redefined what video games and gifted video gamers were capable of. In many ways, it had been their decade. But during the course of the next decade, id would release exactly one game. Tune in next time to see id transform itself all over again.